I'm not one to push myself forward. My brother Simon calls me the quiet apostle, which is hardly fair and not necessarily accurate, but then what else would you expect from Simon? He's the impulsive one, leaps to conclusions, leaps to judgments. Jesus called him Cephas, and Simon didn't appreciate the irony, even if the rest of us did. Someone once said that I should have been called the Rock, since I made about as much noise. That wasn't fair either. I could speak when I needed to. People who knew me thought it was strange when I took to following John, when I became his disciple. But for me, John was a revelation. I'd never seen anyone with such a burning love for the Scriptures. I'd never seen anyone who shone so much with the love of God. People used to say that he was on fire with the anger of God, but I always say that he was on fire with God's love. If he seemed angry, it was more about the collective blindness of Israel and its spiritual rulers and with individuals. With ordinary people in one-to-one situation, it was John's wisdom and humanity. And I know you're not going to believe it, but it's true, his humour that came across. He could be a very charming man, very charismatic. He put on a show in front of the crowd and often seemed lofty and stern, sometimes almost dismissive. John never sought popularity. Some said that he deliberately set out to provoke the elders of Israel, the kings and the Romans, or that he was setting himself up to be the leader of a new Israel, laying the foundations of a revolution. None of that was true. John stood up for the truth and for the purity of response to God and God's demand, and he recognised that to respond to that demand was going to be costly, because it demanded two things from him: that he should speak out, though it put him at risk, and that he should give way. He put himself at risk because he knew that what he said about purity, about righteousness, was not going to go down well with the rich and powerful who were flouting God's law and only interested in maintaining the status quo. John's words made him dangerous to those with the power to silence him, but he knew the risks. We, his disciples, could sense John's power. There were some of us who used to deride the Sadducees, who ran the temple system. I remember one day when John had run rings around a whole group of them who had come out from Jerusalem to debate with him. One of our companions, Joachim it was, said they were all like a bunch of bleating sheep. Stupid. Well, we laughed. But John went very solemn, and then he looked at Joachim and said, "Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups." He also knew that some others wanted to use him to stir up revolution, to proclaim him the Messiah. It would have been simple for John to acquiesce, but he didn't. That was what made John such a great man. Rather than a ranting demagogue, he knew he was just a forerunner, and that when the Messiah truly came, he would have to give way. And that's what he did. When Jesus came to John and listened to him preach, John felt his power and gave way. Two of us were standing talking to John when Jesus walked past. John stopped in mid-sentence. He watched Jesus and then turned to us and said, "There is the Lamb of God." And we looked and saw Jesus, and instinctively we began to follow him. My companion never looked back. But after a few paces, I turned back towards John, and uncertain, I hesitated. John never said a word. He just smiled. There were many emotions in that smile. There was a certain amount of pride, I think, though whether in Jesus, his cousin, or me, his disciple, I don't know. There was a little sadness too. After all, he had spent a lot of time in teaching us the things of God. Most of all, though, I think that smile betrayed satisfaction. He was satisfied that he had played his part and prepared the way. And now it's time to hand over to Jesus. John shooed me off with a gesture of his hands, like a mother sending her children off to play. And so I turned and caught up with Jesus. And I never saw John again. So, I'm lighting this candle for my friend, John, the Baptist, who stood up for truth, whatever it cost him personally. In some people's eyes, the truth John proclaimed diminished him, because he gave way to the greater light of Jesus. For me, though, his humility was the true measure of his greatness.